Whenever I feel my Facebook page isn't making enough noise, I'll post something about tipping. What can I say? I'm a clout chaser. It doesn't really matter what I post about tipping, it's a topic that inherently makes a lot of Americans very angry. As one of those Americans, I want to talk about it. A couple years ago, my comedy sketch team went out for ice cream. We have a shop in my neighborhood where all the employees dress up in tricorn hats. They give the ice creams all like old-timey patriotic names like Declaration of Into Peanut Butter or George Washington's Weird Teeth Vanilla, stuff like that. It's a whole production. One guy took my order at the counter. A second guy helped me make the ice cream more patriotic with toppings and stuff. And a third person checked me out with a tablet computer at the end. I wasn't surprised when the tablet demanded a tip from me, and habitually I hit one of the buttons. But then, something kicked me in the brain. Wait a second, I asked. Who is this tip going to? 3 people helped me. The employee was clearly uncomfortable with the question, but he said, it goes into a fund. Sitting here now, I realized clearly he was talking about a tip pool, or at least I think so. He was just describing it as a fund for some reason. But what I heard at the time was it goes into like a stock portfolio or something like that. That does not fit my vision of what a tip was supposed to be. So for the first time in my life, I hit the no tip option. I thought about that for a long time afterward. I always tipped, always. It's in the commandments of America. By not tipping, I was being sinful, morally wrong, dirty. I've carried that stain on my soul ever since. Seriously, what does tipping mean? Tipping is the tip of the iceberg of a large institutional problem in the US. The people yelling about it online are generally one set of victims yelling at another. So to start off, let's say something obvious. It is not your server's fault that their pay is dependent on tips. And if you are a server, it is not the customer's fault that they are frustrated by tipping and how stupid it's become. You're not enemies to each other. You're being crushed by the same boot. I'm likely to get hateful comments for talking about this sacred cow. I know this because I already have. But I really do think something is broken here, and I want to figure out what went wrong. So here's my question for you. If you live in America, what is a tip? Why do you tip someone? And what does it accomplish? Please, audibly shout your answer at the screen. I can hear you. You're right. That thing you said and that I heard, that was correct. But here's the thing, not all Americans agree with you. Americans are deeply confused about how tipping works now. It's most likely you said your tip was to reward exemplary service. Well, you probably didn't use the word exemplary because no one uses that word but me, but if you weren't raised by South Africans, then you said something else. In any case, according to Business Insider, there are 5 reasons why Americans tip. Reason 1, because it's normalized by society. Yep, I concede this point. But since this reason also defends texting while driving, I hope I don't need to explain why it's stupid. Reason 2, to help low-wage workers. Years ago, on an airplane, I watched several episodes of Adam Ruins Everything. In his episode about tipping, he opens with this.
Let's get one thing straight. If you live in America, you have to tip.
Now, his video is 9 years old at the time I'm recording this, but the underpinning logic of what he says still pretty much holds. If the person you're tipping is receiving tipped minimum wage, they are relying on your tip for an income. Withholding a tip from such a person is punishing the wrong party. Now, you might say, wait, if I don't tip them enough to get minimum wage, then their employer has to bring them up to minimum wage. That's correct. However, remember that this worker is, no offense, serving the most obnoxious person on earth. You. No offense. They deserve more than minimum wage. The next question I'm receiving, thanks to the psychic powers afforded to all YouTubers, is how do I know if they're receiving tip minimum wage? How do I know if they're relying on my tip for an income? The answer to that, stupidly, is you have to do an unreasonable amount of homework. You could look up job listings on the company or anything like that, or you could ask the employee and just hope that they don't have one of those illegal clauses in their contract that tells them not to talk about how much they earn. Or I guess you can guess. The law around whom employers are allowed to pay tipped minimum wage casts a pretty wide net. A tipped employee engages in an occupation in which he or she receives more than $30 per month in tips. This definition is terrifyingly broad. I can tell you from asking a couple friends who worked in the food service industry that unless someone is actually waiting tables, they're probably not being paid tipped minimum wage. I've also heard tales of people even in like fast casual dining jobs who have. I can't find any data that really supports or refutes this. I welcome any information you can find on it. Put it in the comments. Since this video is going out to such a massive audience, I know that someone's going to head down to the comments and scream at me and say, oh, I'm telling you not to tip anyone in the service industry unless they are a waiter. I'm not necessarily saying that. However, Unless you're using cash, it might not be possible to tip them at all. I'd like to introduce my friend Tanner. Tanner works at a food truck in Hawaii, and we talked about tipping.
There's been shifts because it'll tell you the amount as well. So it'll show it on my side. It'll say, it'll say the pay amount, and then it'll show you, $2.38 or whatever the tip was. And assuming they do tip, but it will always show one way or the other. And there's been times where like I look at my on the app, I can look at my tips for that day. And the numbers don't seem right.
Another friend of mine told me this. In our community Facebook group, employees of several local Saratoga Springs restaurants have explicitly stated that tips processed through the iPad point of sale terminals literally do not reach the employees at all in any amount. It is, of course, illegal for managers to withhold tips from their employees. In Utah, there are two circumstances under which they can do it. First, if it's bringing the employee up to minimum wage, or second, if the employee is participating in a tip pool. Oh, and in case you're sick of me using my friends as sources, CBS also did a story on this. There's just no way to know that the money is making it to the employees, far less the employee who actually earned the tip. It sure doesn't seem like it's being communicated well to the employees how or even if their tips are making it to their paychecks. There's so much opacity between the tablet collecting it and the employee receiving it. It raises questions about the legitimacy of the whole process. So let's say that you, the consumer, do want to gap fill this pay from a contract that you had nothing to do with. Even then, it's not clear that tipping at one of those tablets will accomplish that. Now, if you go post on social media that you're going to stop tipping because it's stupid, all of your American friends will drop in and give you careful, well-reasoned arguments about why you should tip. In general, those reasons are all going to fall under one umbrella. American service workers are underpaid. How do I know what they said? I am all of your social media friends. I maintain hundreds of accounts just to keep you trapped in a Truman Show-esque fantasy world. So, where I recorded that I was all of your social media friends, that was recorded on March 28th. Today is April 8th. After recording that line, I went to go perform a comedy show. And in the middle of the show, I lost my voice, which is a real challenge when you're doing a comedy show. And so I'm still coughing. I thought at the time it was because I did this really rough, gravelly Viking voice as part of the show. But it was actually me starting to get a cold, which basically thrashed my voice, gave me a cough for about 2 weeks. So you'll notice the light has moved slightly. The mess behind me has changed slightly. I've played a game of Gloomhaven since then. But anyway, I'm going to go back and just pick up where I left off recording and keep going. And I'm wearing the same clothes, so we can all just pretend this is one continuous stream. Anyway, hi. I'm happy that I can speak again. Reason 3. To reward a server for doing a good job. This is theoretically the original justification for tipping. That to ensure promptness thing you may have heard, that's actually a myth. Especially because wouldn't that mean you'd have to spell with an E? To ensure? A tip? This logic behind tipping makes sense, doesn't it? Someone who gives better service should make more money. It's an actionable, material way for you to show your approbation of the server. It also conveniently sets up a weird power dynamic where the server will, for example, flirt with you in hopes of getting more money out of you. Yikes. Before we attack this claim directly, can we just gut check it? Have you ever tipped this way? Now remember, I can't hear you, so I did just hear a bunch of you yell yes at the screen. Okay, that's fine. Please drop me a comment on this video explaining your system, right? What portion of the tip is dedicated to promptness? What portion to conversation or the lack thereof? Could you share your price sheet with me? And hey, why not share it with your waiter? That way you'll have transparency. That's absurd, you say. There's no price sheet. I tip according to how I feel at the end of the meal. Okay, so what factors went into how you feel, and how many of those were controlled by your waiter? How much did the waiter's actions actually affect their tip? How much of a spread has there been between the tips you've given at the last, say, 10 meals you ate out for? Surely they weren't all of exactly equal quality, service-wise, so the tips would have to be different. Now, in fairness, there is someone left who has responded in all the right ways to these questions, someone who really does tip in accordance with their satisfaction with the service, and probably has some kind of system they use to calculate their tip. His name is Hank, and he's super weird. But thanks for watching, Hank. The rest of you, I think, get my point. Even if we think we're tipping based on quality of service, we're probably not. And whatever small deviation from the mode we use when we tip, it's not enough to justify the waiter spending more time at our table when there are other tables who will always tip a baseline 15% or whatever. Here, let Adam Conover explain it.
If I give better service, I get a bigger tip.
Actually, you don't. A study at Cornell University found that the real reasons people tip more or less are basically random, and that customers who receive great service tip on average just 1% more than customers who don't.
Meet Rachel.
I am Canadian. I have worked in 6 different restaurants in Canada that were tipped jobs, and then 1 restaurant in Canada that was a non-tipped job. And then I've worked in 2 jobs within that context in the United States. One was at a university at a restaurant, and it was not a tipped job. And then I've worked at a non-restaurant job where tips are optional in the United States.
Rachel's an interesting case study because, as you just heard, she worked in Canada where tips are put on top of minimum wage, and also in the United States where they aren't necessarily. I just want you to hear her thoughts on whether having a bad day affected her tips. Did you ever have like an off day or something? Like, did you feel like on a day you were doing a worse job and the tips would reflect that by being lower, or? Okay.
No, I really don't think that affected things at all. Like, there might be the rare case where, you're on fire and you really hit it off with the table and they give you a slightly bigger tip. But I would say on average, people are just doing it habitually and because of the culture pressure. I don't really think that the money I made off of tips really reflected the quality of my service.
So even if you are this unicorn tipper who tips according to the old ways, proportionate with the quality of service received, the other customers at the restaurant are not. Your waiter knows that by serving a larger number of tables, whatever penalty you assign to their tip will be more than compensated by the baseline 15 to 20% tip they can reliably get from other tables. In this way, they are rewarded for waiting on more customers, which is precisely the opposite of giving more attention to each one. The existence of tipping actually incentivizes worse service. And here's the thing. All of this logic attacks the idea of tipping in general, but the tablets asking for a tip before the service has happened make all of this far weirder. In those cases, the server hasn't rendered any service. What are you rewarding? It has nothing to do with how they prepare or present your food. This creates a problem because the food is literally why you're there. Of course, no one is rewarding service this early in the transaction. The tip then is just a semi-random number we're choosing to increase our order by. It has no relationship to our opinion of the service rendered because that service hasn't happened. Reason 4. To buy future service. A common theme comes up whenever I see discussions of tipping online. One of my Facebook friends put it this way. My concern at those places is what may be done to my food if I don't tip. Tragically, I understand this point of view, and although I understand that it is rare, we've all seen the ragebait stuff online where an employee, or more likely a food delivery driver, sabotages a customer's food because they found the tip insufficient. By the way, I know many of those stories are indeed fake. I lack the ability to figure out which ones are and aren't most of the time. The point is, the threat of being punished for being a bad tipper is always there. Imagine with me that you were at a restaurant and they handed you a menu with 2 prices. The higher standard price and the lower, we probably won't, but we might dip our balls in your food price. Which one would you pick? I would pick neither. I would walk out of that restaurant and never return. I don't negotiate with terrorists. And yet here we are. Reason 5. Gain social esteem by earning the server's respect or the respect of your dining party. Look, I'll be straight with you. This is the only justification for tipping that I think holds up to its own logic and isn't obliterated by the existence of pre-tipping on those horrible tablets. So yeah, if your reason for tipping is to impress your friends, I guess make a big show of hitting the 27% button or whatever. Of course, hear me out. Your friends might be even more impressed if you just handed them the cash. That would necessitate carrying cash though, so. We've now covered the 5 primary reasons people tip. While they didn't make a lot of sense initially, they make even less sense in an environment where the tip precedes the service. That said, I want to address an interesting point that was presented to me, and that is, tipping is pay what you want in disguise. Essentially, the argument goes like this. Restaurants, as a business model, have a very high failure rate in general. They run on very thin margins, and removing tipping would require giving all the employees a pay raise. This would necessarily result in a price hike. And having higher prices than your competitor is suicide in an already high-risk industry. I am sympathetic to this predicament and to the business owners who are just trying to survive. Most restaurants are a passion project for the people who own them, and I understand not wanting to jeopardize that dream by moving to an unconventional payment system, like unconventional by American standards. A friend of mine put it this way: tipping is amazing because it directly benefits hard-working, low-wage workers as a form of private action. The recent expansion of tipping allows me to do so in a socially appropriate way in more contexts, which I've felt is a good thing. And yeah, I think that's not a bad argument. It theoretically frames tipping as this kind of opt-in socialism, where people with more means are able to pay higher amounts for a service that could be then acquired for a lower amount by other people. If this is what tipping actually were, I could be convinced of its value, but it's not. It's a shame-based system in which you are told to guess a number that won't upset your server, and your server is dependent on you guessing the right number for them to make rent that month. So if you don't guess right, you're a monster. The lack of standardization hurts tipping. This is kind of an aside, but I was being sincere about the number being a guess. Here, we'll do it again. I'll turn on my speaker so I can hear you, and you shout at me, how much do you tip for takeout? See? Wait, sorry, I forgot that you can't hear what people are yelling at me through their screens. The numbers that people yelled at me range between 0 and 30%. I don't know what's more insane, the fact that no standardization has existed for this for years, maybe ever, or the fact that you just got genuinely angry to find out that people were tipping a different number than you. It's random. Whence the tablets? Point-of-sale companies pitch to business owners that a simple tipping prompt will increase their revenue, which it does, and it requires essentially no effort from the business owner. Do the POS companies get a bite of those tips too? I'm actually not sure. I couldn't find a good source saying one way or the other. Utah is a state where it's legal to deduct processing fees from tips, and in any case, it does take pressure off the employer's payroll. There's simply no good financial reason not to have that prompt enabled as a business owner. Go away, beat it. We Americans are cattle, and we'll just jab at the buttons to get the awkward part of the transaction over with. And employers and POS companies are making money off of our awkwardness. How do we fix this? You might think the answer is stop tipping, but as we've talked about, I don't think that's a good solution for two reasons. One, it punishes the worker whose fault this isn't. And two, it's unlikely to scale, so it probably wouldn't work. However, I do think there's a good case not to pre-tip, which is to say not giving a tip for service that hasn't been rendered yet. If you do want to tip the counter worker for, taking your order, you still have the option to ask for cash back that you can then hand to them after you receive your food. That makes sure the money will go to the person you're trying to reward. If that makes you feel weird, just remember it's still less weird than what you're doing when you hit the buttons on the tablet. I don't think that this will solve the problem either, though. As with many institutional power imbalances, the solutions are going to be political and cultural. All you can do is operate the best you can in the system you live. As long as tipped minimum wage is the law, there are going to be servers who are dependent on your tips. The problem will continue to metastasize. Not all glum news, though. Back in 2019, a group called Raise started mobilizing to end the tip minimum wage, and... I guess it didn't work out. Conclusion. I want to restate something. In the United States, in 2024, there are still some situations in which I believe you are morally obligated to tip. I believe those are the same situations they were in 2008, and all of them take place after service is rendered. But you know what? I've made my case. If you still want to tip a computer for something that hasn't happened yet, I don't blame you. I actually understand. The social pressure to do so is immense. That's the point. Here's my request, though. Every time you do tip, ask yourself, who are you tipping? And why are you tipping the amount that you are? Just be intentional and aware about what you're doing, because intentionality and awareness are the first steps to escaping this unending nightmare. Okay, thanks, bye.